Thank you, Peter, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Audrey, for letting me speak here. What I would like to talk about here is the transition that has happened for researchers and the rest in the publishing scholarly communication space since, well, let's be a little bit parochial, since I was a graduate student. Let me take a step back and talk about the time. We all like to think of what used to be good old days, but maybe when we look at them, maybe not as much. 1990, middle of grad school, print was the dominant format. What that meant was everything had to be explicitly handed. Everything had to be something you could touch. What your library shelves could hold was the realm that you could discover. I came from a smaller school. My realm was really small. Came to CMU. The realm was bigger, but still bounded. Every library is bounded in different ways. They were the needs of distributing physically published paper articles. What that meant was there were a small number of articles that were everywhere. There was a whole discipline identifying core collections. There were scientometric researchers looking at defining what core collections were and what Bradford's law was and da-da-da-da-da-da. All very good. What that meant was that if you got your article into one of those journals, you would have visibility across the globe. And if you did not, for whatever reason, maybe it didn't meet what scope they had in mind for theirs, maybe your article was more specific, only a small number of libraries, only a small number of researchers would have the opportunity of being able to even see what you had done. We talk about find, we talk about search, we talk about discovery. What you did was browse. The common thing to do, my advisor told me, this is how you keep up with things. You go to the library every week, you look at what journals are on the current journal issues shelf, you browse through them. You look at what has been published. And in computer science, a lot of publication was in conferences, happen once a year. They arrive in your mailbox, you look at them. Another common way of following things up was bibliographies of papers you read. You followed pointers. That's one list that you browse. Some of them are of interest. Some of them may be relevant. And of course, there is the shelves of libraries that you would, and God damn it, had to walk. I maybe overstate my case. Some libraries did have search services. CMU did. God, it was fantastic when I arrived there and I could see that I could search based on title, authors. Amazing. There were some, InSpec had some abstracts, InSpec being the field that there's no full text indexing, there's no relevance ranking. So keep in mind, when you're doing most recent first ranking, that's just browse, that's a little bit more focused. That's not letting you find things that are relevant for you, that help you, that you need, that you're trying to get to learn what has been done in an area. It has tremendous effects, and I will get to those, in terms of what you are willing to look for and what other work are you likely to build your own on. In every way, you were limited. You're limited by what your shelves could hold. You are limited what your search service could have, what your titles could express, what your abstracts could get to. You are always limited by what money your institution could put into getting pieces of paper mailed to you. That which you don't know about, you cannot build on. That's what it does to research. So how are we today? Today, almost all journals are online. Large fraction of archives of most journals worldwide. There's variations. English more than non-English, STM more than social sciences, so on and so forth. But large fractions of the archive is online. Anyone, anywhere, could be in a small little school in India, can browse it all. Your library is worldwide. You are no longer limited by what your institution can afford for you. Looking at it from the other end, the distribution pyramid that I talked about initially, about the core journals and the somewhat core journals and the non-core journals, has flattened. Everybody can browse, find, discover all journals, all articles. Core, non-core, expensive, cheap, new, old, legendary, and hoping to be legendary. You're no longer limited to browse. You're no longer limited to where you're published. It is not just that if you are published in the magical core collections, would you be seen. Relevance ranking allows all articles to rise on their own merit. And full text indexing liberates the entire body of scholarship to rise, not just what the author thought were going to be important when they wrote the article. Many times, it is the technique that you have found, that you have used to study a particular phenomenon, turns out to spark off a very deep sequence of research to allow a lot of other people to do what was previously hard or impossible to do. Anyone. If you can get online, you can find it all. Thank you, Peter, for reminding me what I had said back in 2006. I think today we are a long way there. You can find your own area. You can find your colleagues' areas. You can find articles in areas across campus. Some things that you need for your work, something that might inform your work, or something you may just want to read because you have always wanted to read it. It could be the classics. It could be the latest magical stuff. And it's free to everyone. If you can get online, you can join the entire global research community. You're not bound. You're not limited. And that's not all. There is so much more today that you can actually read. Finding is step one. Important, necessary, not entirely sufficient. There are so many different ways in which researchers today are able to actually get to what they need to get to. And these come from different sources, different parts of our community, but they have come together to dramatically increase the level of access that is accessible to researchers today. Let me take a step back. This is fantastic. I could not have dreamt of this 25 years ago when I was a graduate student. I reveled in what my library provided me, but I could not think that this is what would be possible. I grew up in a place where there's researchers studying things all day long. And most of what they did made very little difference because they were not at the frontier. Today, everyone who wants to be can be at the frontier. Let no one tell you that scholarly communication is slow to change, doesn't change, it is still stuck back, and look where all the rest of the internet has gone. Look what's happened. All of us together here have made it possible. It required all pieces to come together to bring us to this level. Okay, so what happens? Because so far so good. We are at this point. How do things change? What change does it do to researchers who are the primary goal in the end of this transformation? We talk about all the details, but ultimate success of scholarly communication is when people who are tackling the hard problems of the world are able to do more than they were able to do previously. What the changes I'm looking at is what do they look for, what do they search for, what do they read, what do they cite, what do they build their work on, how has that changed? Taking that one at a time. There's been orders of magnitude growth in queries. It comes from both sources. Many, many more queries per user, and we'll look at why. And many, many, many more users, just because you can get at it. This is true across all research areas and all geographical areas, everywhere. We have significant usage in Palestine. So what do they look for? The queries, as people get used to what they are able to do, they change the kind of queries they use. Most of our growth is in terms of keywords and concepts. A lot of scholarly search has often considered known item searches or author searches as the most common classes that they see. That is because when your ranking is most recent first, there is not much else that you can do. You have to know exactly what you're talking about to be able to formulate a query that will give you reasonable results. If ranking doesn't work, then the user must do the work to formulate the query right. The average query length, as people saw queries were working better, the average query length grew, and now it's about between 4 and 5, still continuing to grow. We see multiple concepts, we see multiple ideas, and this, to some extent, maybe it is to be expected and maybe it is not. Most of our queries are unique. We see very few queries repeat. In some sense, we see that's somewhat true, somewhat true in web search as well. There's a lot of queries that don't repeat ever. But scholarship is different from a global search. Global search, there are a lot of people who are interested in common things. Everybody wants to know when the train is going. Everyone wants to know what the news is. Everyone has, there's a large enough body of people that have many common interests. In scholarship, it's not a big village, not a big city. It's a collection of small villages. Every conference roughly defines the size of a particular field. That's the body of people that are going to search in a particular area. So what we find is most of our queries are unique. Queries are no longer limited to your own area, because you could do a query in an area for which you did not have expertise. You did not have to craft your query, and it just worked. So you would do more, and it just worked, and you do more. And so people are willing to try going beyond their own limited area. Take a moment, think about what that does to what people are willing to do research in, how that influences what ideas they are willing to bring into their research, what influences what thoughts they bring into it. Relevance ranking makes this thing significantly easier. You could do simple queries. You would get broad classical results. You can start your exploration about your colleagues' areas. If you're looking at very specific things, you want the most recent stuff, you know all the other work that has been done in the area, it just shows up. You do a more limited by terminology, by time, by various other things, it just shows you the results that are suitable for you. The most significant aspect is we see from the same users a mix of expert and non-expert queries. People have often thought of experts and non-experts, two different categories. Can we identify the researchers and the undergraduates? The labels that are often associated with researchers and experts and non-experts, but it isn't that way. There's a whole continuum. There's my very specific research area. Then there is stuff beyond that. And there is stuff beyond that. And then there is the next department. You used to never be able to do this. Since it's easy and it works mostly, there's a lot of it. So what do they read? They look for things differently. What do they read? There's dramatic growth in the number of articles they click upon. We see sustained growth, not just in terms of number of users, but also in the number of articles that each user clicks on. There's a growth in the diversity of areas that each user clicks on. It's no longer limited to just my very specific stuff. People read a lot more. There's growth in both abstracts and full text. There is much larger growth in abstracts. And I'll explore this a little bit. Keep in mind, this disproportionate growth, this larger growth in abstracts comes at a time where much, much, much more full text is actually accessible to everybody. What we find as a researcher workflow, unlike when you're doing a normal web query where you have a specific question and you're looking for a specific answer, there is not a navigational answer. Scholarly research queries are trying to find things to read, things that are likely to inform me in whatever question or whatever direction I am considering right now. So what do? I do a query. I scan the set of results. Do any of them look kind of useful, vaguely? If so, I'll click on them, look at the abstract. And then subset of them will actually turn out to, since in the query result set you only see 2 or 3 lines, you click through the abstract, you read the abstracts, decide whether the abstract is worth your while. Then you go on, back to the result set, click on full text, go for it. If nothing works, if I don't have enough, I modify my query, go on to other things. An interesting aspect that we find is that abstracts in which the users have an indication in search results that they are likely to have access tend to get clicked more often. Sort of a priming effect where you believe you are going to get more value out of this, even if you don't actually take advantage of that value. We see both effects, both from actual availability as well as the potential utility of availability. Just to give you an example of what this looks like in Scholar, on the right-hand side you see marked out results that with collaboration with publishers, we are able to indicate that the user has access. Those are the markers that the user has to know in search results that you have access, and that tend to influence behavior. PDF remains extremely popular. I hear every year, every other year, beyond PDF, get rid of PDF, PDF is trash, PDF is nonsense, but PDF is extremely popular. Why? Because you don't know whether you will have access to this thing tomorrow. People used to deal with this by having shelves. If you walk into one of the older faculty members, you would see large shelves or closets or whatever with large files full of papers that were printed. PDFs are just that. They make sure that what is important to me, that I think is going to be important to me later, I shall continue to have access to. Taking a switch. So what do they cite? The reason why you look at citations is both in terms of what they acknowledge as work that has gone before theirs and what they might have built their work on top of. Why people cite is a long history of analysis and research. I'm not going into that. What we did was to study evolution of citation patterns over this 20-year time period. We looked at the age of cited articles, and we looked at what fraction of the top cited articles were from what you would have considered the core journals or the elite journals, the top journals in every given category, on a category by category basis. 261 different categories, largely because fields differ substantially in how they treat older work, in how fast they cite, and so on. So looking first at the age of cited articles, we looked at 3 different time periods, articles that were 10 years and older, 15 years and older, and 20 years and older. We computed the fraction of citations to older articles for articles published in every year for 20 years. For 9 broad areas, and within those 9 broad areas, 261 subject categories over this time period. What do we find? We have found an acceleration. There's always been a growth in fraction of citations to older articles. You would expect that as the body of literature grows, some of the ideas that you're acknowledging have been around for a while, have become successful, have been widely known, and they tend to get cited. But what we find is that this particular trend dramatically accelerated. If you see the paper that we published about it, you can see basically a graph going like this. Roughly around 2002, 2004, taking off much, much sharper. One way to represent this is the growth over the first half of this time period was half the growth of the second half, the significant acceleration. So what might have caused this? Most of the archives came online in this time period, and relevance ranked search allowed them to be found. So that's the 10-year time, the 10-year stats. If you look at the 15-year stats, you see very similar pattern. There's 30% growth for articles over this time, 30% growth in the fraction of citations to articles that are 15 years or older, and about similar for 20 years or older. What we see, what this clearly indicates that the researchers, since they are now easily able to dig into the scholarly record, do that more often. That which is easy to do, and this will come up multiple times, if you make it really, 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 really easy, people will do it many, 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 many more times. Not very surprising. You look around and all the things that you've been doing 20 years ago and what you do today, and you look at what changes in terms of what you have made in your own life, in terms of communication, in terms of how you talk to people, how you communicate with people, you would see the same thing. Scholarly communication is no different. Looking at the other direction, we looked at the fraction of elite papers, where elite was defined as the top 1,000 papers in any given year in one category, computed separately for every one of the 261 categories. When we say elite journals, everybody thinks of Science, Nature, Cell, BMJ, and so on and so forth. That's definitely the elite of the elite. But realistically, not everybody is going to cite, or not everybody is going to publish in this, because they're not this, from a scope point of view, they don't really fit. This is looking at things on a field by field basis, looking at what you would have considered the core journals and the non-core journals. So fields have grown, number of papers have grown. We wanted to limit the effect. We wanted to make sure that we were not really measuring the growth in the size, number of publications in any given category. So 1,000 papers, fixed. 10 journals, fixed. Let's see what happens. All 10 journals publish more than 1,000 papers. There is no issue of being limited by the number of slots. We looked at the fraction of total citations also. We look at the top papers and the total citations to the top journals. There's a steady and sustained drop in the fraction of top papers in top journals. There's a 64% growth in of the top papers that were published someplace other than the top journals in their category. To give you numbers, 146 papers for a representative category, 149 papers to 245. It occurs in all 9 broad areas. This is a consistent phenomenon across the entire space. In 4 out of the 9 areas, the non-core journals published more than 1/3 of the top 1,000 papers. Looking at the other measure, looking at the total number of citations to the core journals, there's a steady and sustained drop in the fraction of total citations to the top 10 journals. There's detailed stats up there which you can read. What that brings is that every article increasingly, not entirely, increasingly stands on its own. Since every article is just as easy to find, every article can now stand on its own merit rather than the merit of the venue in which it was published. There's a combination. It took bringing everything online and making it easy to find to make this possible. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, take a step back, and try to come up with some conclusions. The consistent pattern in the citation aspect, in the queries, and how it has evolved is a spread of attention. If it is easy to find, if it is easy to look, people will look far afield. If it's useful, people will build their work, their mansion, their hut, whatever you call it, on it. It's across the spectrum, every form. Not just the core and the non-core journals, older articles, regional journals which previously would barely see the light of day outside their own country are today being cited across the globe. And for dissertations, there's always been the joke that you hide a $20 bill in your dissertation and put it back, come back in your 25th reunion and still find it there. Of course, you had to go to your library, the library that you graduated from, to be able to get access to it. Are you surprised? It's not just that dissertations have not had the potential of having impact. It's just they were just too damn hard to find. It's not surprising. If you are trying to bring everybody to the common research frontier, where everybody's ideas can be used to build on, you should expect a spread of attention. Insight is not limited to people who have money. It's also not limited to people who happen to publish in the well-known journals. Ideas come from anywhere. The Some people took the paper that last year we presented at a couple of the citation results in papers, and people took it as a statement that elite journals were not elite. That's not true. If you look at it, 10 journals still publish 75% of the top articles. But there's a clear, consistent downward trend. So what that says is, previously the distribution would skew people's attempts at trying to get their top papers in the top places, because only if you were able to enter that gate would people even be aware of what you did. If that gate has been opened wide, then there's a second, after the prestige of the elite journals, getting it out sooner, getting your name stamped, getting a priority may turn out to be far more important than just walking down the reputation hierarchy of journals. I've heard about trying to get paper one place, second place, third place, fourth place, 3 years after you finish the work, trying to get it published someplace. You would short circuit this. Articles from archives are used a lot. I gave you one characterization of what the growth was, which was basically the second half. Growth in the second half was double the growth in the first half. Here's quartiles to give you an idea that it is still accelerating. Older advances no longer die off as easily. They never died off entirely. But things that were not fantastic and immediately recognized as soon as they came out, they could often not quite die out, but kind of whimper off. That has become a lot less. From a publishing point of view, if you will digitize, they will come. If you have archives that are not digitized, please do so. In terms of what people look for, read, users want a lot of abstracts. Some full text, but a lot of abstracts. That's what allows them to scan so much more. That's what allows them to go so much far afield. To read, the growth in reading comes from the ability of being able to look at a lot more abstracts. Research, obviously, is a process of filtering, trying to find things that are relevant to you. There has been a transition in the last few years of trying to give people full text as early as possible, but it doesn't actually help them. They aren't looking to read all of the articles they happen to find. They're looking to filter first and then read. So limiting, for example, the counterstats to full text is missing an entire portion of utility of articles to researchers. Usage analytics should actually include much more of the user flow. I mean, after all, the goal of analytics is these are the journals, these are the publication, what is its value to my researchers? From a librarian point of view, that's what Counter is trying to feed for. Counter is focused on full text. I forget the journal report numbers, but full text, gold OA, and how many were access denied. As you can see, abstracts, downloads, that's what is also popular. It's not that the others are not popular. These are also popular by not looking at these. A significant part of the user workflow is being missed. Abstracts have long been written for my very close peers, because that's the only people you expected would read them, because they would browse the journal tables of content, or because they would happen to search this discipline-specific search service, or because most recent first didn't allow anybody else to do anything else. If people are going further afield, you have a lot of readers who have some expertise, who are not entirely non-expert, who could use a little bit broader treatment to be able to get to your work. If they happen to have something easier to read, something easier to understand, the likelihood of them actually making it through to your full text is that much higher. This is not surprising. There are broad audience journals that have always done this. What I'm trying to say is many, many more journals are maybe not broad audience, but much more broader audience than you thought before. Finally, I would like to leave you with a few personal statements. People talk about the problems of information plenty. Please bring it on. The alternative is information famine, and I've been there. We are lucky that we have the ability of a global connection to bring anybody who's able to get online to the same common frontier. People worry about change. Change is faster today than it used to be. But Lord, you could be living in the Middle Ages. That would be very static. We have the opportunity of leaving the world a little bit better than we found it, and no man can ask for more. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a great talk. Very, very interesting. Lots of interesting observations from the Google Scholar data, obviously. So my question is about you mentioned that, or you said that elite journals are becoming less elite over time, and that's because of shifts in citation behaviour as your justification for that. But on the authorship side, researchers are under increasing pressure to publish in high-impact fact journals and elite journals, more so than they used to be. So how does that distinction between the utility to authors and the utility to readers play into this?
Well, I don't publish anymore, so I can't easily answer that question. But I would expect, on pure speculation and no knowledge at all, that you would shoot for the best journal you possibly could, and if they didn't work there, you would go to whatever was quick. I'm making this up.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm Toby Green from OECD. OECD are primarily book publishers. Google Scholar doesn't cover books. When will Google Scholar cover books so that the magic that you bring on the journal world will also apply to book publishers and to all the great content we publish?
Thank you. Thank you. Lovely question. I would be able to do so when I can find a model under which users can read some representation of monographs that meets their expectations. The challenge is not books per se, but monographs. I'll come back. Give me a second. Let me finish this. There are many ways in which this can happen. One simple way, I say it is simple, it is not simple at all, if books were all open access. Then you don't have an issue. There's a fundamental difference between what users' expectation is when they come to a journal. They are looking for early stage work, which they're not expecting to provide a specific answer. When they go to a book, they're expecting a mature work that has distilled knowledge over some time period. They're looking for an answer. In those environments, a subscription-based model makes it difficult to match the user's expectations. If you match some part of a book, and you land the user on the prefix of the book or the early part of the book, user doesn't know what this is all about. Journals and abstracts over centuries have managed to achieve a relatively reasonable compromise in that space. If I can solve that problem, Lord, I would love to. Please go ahead.
Can I invite you to experiment with our model? All our books are open access. We break them all up by chapter. Every chapter has an abstract. It's exactly the same as journal publishing. It's just it's got a container called a book. So would you like to have a go with our
Come talk to me.
Because we've been asking for years and have got nowhere. So if we can have a meeting afterwards, we'd love to get it set up so we can get our books discovered through Scholar.
Come talk to me, we'll make it happen.
Mark Harden from Mosaic Recruitment. Thank you for your speech. I heard you speak at the Bielefeld Library Conference in 2006, and one of the things, to paraphrase wildly, that you said was the great thing about Google Scholar was that it made library search engines unnecessary, publishers, platforms unnecessary, and kind of librarians unnecessary. I said I was paraphrasing wildly.
I assure you that was not a paraphrase from anything I could have possibly said.
Well, I can say that the conversation in the coffee lounge afterwards was, oh my goodness, this man is trying to kill libraries. Where do you stand on how Google Scholar interacts with the traditional ecosystem of discovery and librarianship?
Are there librarians here? Okay. Okay, maybe I can't call on you to answer the question. Let me do it myself. We work with libraries worldwide today. We have currently worked with over 4,000 libraries to help the library on-campus users access what their libraries have accessed for them. We have worked with libraries to index what their repositories have put together. It is never an intent to replace, because that doesn't help the research endeavor one little bit. The goal of Scholar is to make it easier for people solving difficult problems to do more. That's the only goal of Scholar. And that's the only direction we have been heading towards. Today, libraries work with us way, way more than they used to in 2006. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I hope I'm at least in the same area.
Frances Pinter. I'm the founder of Knowledge Unlatched. I was delighted to hear what you had to say about monographs going open access. Knowledge Unlatched is an initiative which is doing exactly that. It's a collaborative work between librarians using their acquisitions budgets to fund going open access for monographs. And I really would like to be in that room with Toby when you meet with him, because we're trying to do something very similar, but across all publishers, all monographs, all over the world.
As I said, please talk to me. I would love to be a part of that conversation.
I'm David Thomas with Thomson Reuters. Whenever there is a news about a potential acquisition of a content provider, could be media, could be print, could be digital, one of the names that I always see mentioned, oh, it's got to be Google. It's got to be Google going to buy this content creator company. It could be publisher, it could be media company, whatever. Can you talk about that as being part of your or Google's strategy in terms of owning and creating more content versus just digitizing what's out there?
I work on search. So my focus entirely is on directing users wherever the content is today. I don't know about the strategies that you're referring to. Google's much bigger than me today.
Hi, I'm Kaveh from River Valley. You talked about abstracts and how they're being looked at by people in different fields. So there's an argument for having those more accessible and less jargony. But of course, then they go to the main paper and then they're confronted with jargon again. How can we encourage less jargony papers so that people from different fields or non-specialists altogether can actually understand papers rather than people in the narrow field?
Great question. One that I have no answer whatsoever to. I would love to be able to encourage at least abstracts to be easier to read. One step at a time, Kaveh. If we are able to get to that place, we would look at something broader. I suspect it may be much harder to get the full articles converted, largely because you would end up, it's much messier for users to write long articles for two different audiences. You do want to provide a detailed article that's written for your own peers. The value of abstract in this context is as a filtering mechanism that allows people who are looking for things to quickly decide whether they need to put in more resources. If there's an article, I've read, unfortunately, a very large number of articles related to various forms of health issues with elderly people. Places where I had to go, I went, I found out what I needed to know to be able to make sense out of those articles. But I need to be able to know which articles I should put that much more effort into. So that's the appeal that was included in the conclusions. If it can be made to go further, more power to you.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Lava from Access Innovations, back here in the back. This study, I have some questions about the study that you did and the selection of the 1,000 papers and the 10 top journals, which I assume you did through Google Analytics. Is it possible to read this research? Is it published anywhere?
It's available on arXiv. Both the articles are available on arXiv.
What's the title I'm looking for?
I can give you names, or you could go to our blog, which has linked to both of them. The blog is not very frequently updated, so it should be pretty easy to find them. Yeah.
Hi, I'm John Lees-Miller from Overleaf. I think in many STEM disciplines there's a saying that the way you read a paper is you read the abstract, you look at the figures, and you read the conclusion. I'm wondering whether that's borne out in the data that you collect.
It depends on the field. Different fields have different approaches of going through articles. The more experimental fields tends to be what you describe. The more stylized a field is, the more likely, where you don't need to understand the rest of it, you already know what is being talked about, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to do something like what you described. The more designy the field is harder that you're going to be able to do that. You're the boss. You.
One question there, and then one question just.
Okay.
Hi, Patrick. I'm wondering about a future where computers start to read on behalf of researchers, and where research is going to be semantically marked up, and the computers are going to understand the knowledge. And when will publishers come to a point when they publish XML, they've got semantic markup in there that computers can read and help us in advancing research, filtering?
I'm not sure how I can answer that question as to when publishers would do that.
What are your thoughts about it?
It's actually not necessary to a priori mark these things up. It is possible to discover this information. Some parts of it gets discovered in pieces, but not as much as could be. The issue is not identifying what might be a semantically relevant phrase or term, but to understand the much of what is left unsaid in the writing of a paper, because it's expected that a reader or the author of it has internalized all of that before this particular article. When you refer to, say, for example, you're doing some research in, I'm going to go out of my field, and so if it sounds funny, please go with it, relativity. All of relativity is assumed. Now, if I refer to something, that all of that underlying knowledge doesn't actually get surfaced to be able to make the most sense out of it. It's more challenging than it seems by a simple markup. To be able to use it in a way that significantly changes what researchers can do. You can search based on terms, you can do simple synonyms, you can do simple related terms, etc., but they are not transformative. They are a little bit better. Not that we shouldn't get a little bit better all the time, but that's not the magic people are looking for. That requires much more.
Hello, Roger Schoenfeld from Ithaca SNR. You spoke a little bit about access to content in addition to the discovery of it, saying that content is much more available to researchers worldwide. And of course, you mentioned big deals, and implicit in that is some of the challenges in making materials accessible as well, not to take away from the broad conclusions you've reached, of course. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what happens after Google Scholar from a workflow perspective. So you showed the links of, some cases it's off campus, some cases it's HTML, some cases it's PDF. What is the user experience like? How bad of an experience do users have getting from Google Scholar or other discovery services that have made discovery so much better than it's ever been before into the content itself? Or do you see it now as completely seamless for all users worldwide?
Of course not.
And
There's no way. That land of milk and honey will hopefully arrive someday, but nowhere close to that today.
What would you like to see happen to improve that?
I don't have an easy answer to that. Ideally, it would be possible for everybody. I don't know how to be able to read what they need to read. I don't know how to achieve it. There are many complicated ways that one could possibly achieve it. The directions that some of the funding agencies have been taking provides one possible path, not complete, but definitely a step forward. Heck, if there were national licenses as had been proposed long ago, that would be another path. There are many initiatives. Highwire has an initiative, Hinari have initiatives that allow researchers in different countries to be able to access articles that they would otherwise not be able to. That's yet another direction that allows it to happen. I don't have a silver bullet to solve these problems. If I had, I would not be standing here.
Thank you.
Jake Zarnagar from Silverchair. As a collection point of tons of searches, you're able to build user information around the researchers that the publishers don't have access to, including when they're reading out of specialty. I'm willing to bet that many publishers here are not able to determine when readers are reading out of specialty on their platforms. Have you pondered passing some of that information that you have about the researchers' past searches to the publishers as they come across so they could craft a content experience that might match closer up? We don't
actually track past searches by specific researchers. I don't have a means of doing that. A large fraction of our users are not logged in.
Well, that's not a complete stopper.
So the question is, ultimately, it has to allow researchers to do something dramatically more than what they used to be able to do. You first start from there and then go to anything else that might make that goal possible. We don't actually change our results for any query today. All users get the same results, modulo the access links. The result order is the most relevant results for you. For you being anybody for you. The access links are in addition to that indicate you, based on your associations with whatever institutions you happen to be associated with, have access to these versions from these locations.
Anurag, it's Pippa Smart, the editor of Learned Publishing. Thank you very much for your talk, and it's good to meet you face to face. I was interested in what you said about information, the value of the wealth of information we've got. One problem inherent in that is that there is also a lot of retracted articles which are found. And I wondered if you at Google had any thoughts about how you render the results of those when people do a search and they come across an article which has been retracted, and whether you've had any thoughts about whether you would exclude those perhaps from the search results, or whether you would try and flag them up as having been retracted, should, of course, you get the information from the publisher.
That's a good question. It's a very small, while it might be a larger fraction of articles, it's an extremely small number of articles all around. The point at which that becomes the significant problem in discovery, we would have solved practically everything else. Seriously. There are many, many, many problems yet today to solve, which we are currently working on. Would love to be able to make progress on these. Most obvious of it It is, can I help you find things that you need to know, but you don't know you need to know? It is actually, this is basically trying to help you regain some of the serendipity which reading those journal issue tables of content used to provide to you 25, 30, 40 years ago. When the fields were small, the number of people working in them was small, it was much easier to be able to jump to a completely random area which might be useful there. There are large areas that could make a dramatic difference. You focus on them first, and you look at the other issues once you've had an opportunity to.
Richard Geddy from STM. I was interested in your response just now to the question about searches on Google Scholar not reflecting any of your previous searches or your own profile. This presumably makes you very distinctive from the main Google, where if I do a search on something and you do a search on something, we may very well get different results depending on what you have already captured about us. So is that absolutely right, that if you do a search on Google Scholar, if every single person in this room did a search on the same topic on Google Scholar, they would get the same results?
At the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
Yes, because time will make things different, yes. Indeed. The world of research is global. The world of trying to find the BMW dealership is fundamentally different. You want the local one. You don't really want the one in Detroit.
Anurag, hello, hi, I'm Malavika, nice to meet you. I'm at the Biochemical Society. We publish journals, and I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier, which was every article stands on its own. Every article is just as easy to find as another. In a world that looks like that, it would be lovely to have your perspective on what the future of a journal is and what the role of a journal is in attaining the bigger goals for scholarly communication.
I don't have a good answer to that. I really don't. There are many reasons why journals have existed for so long. Initially, they were channels of distribution. That role is less significant than used to be, far less significant than used to be. They are channels of recognition. That role continues to be important. So there are multiple reasons, roles that journals fulfill. Some of those I expect will continue for long periods of time. For an article that has been just published, you have three signals to indicate whether this is likely of use to you as a researcher. And you use this all the time. You see who it was written by, which is the historical reputation of the lab or the authors involved, which gives you a likelihood, an inkling that this might actually be worth your time. Where it has been published, that brings together so many different effects. People tend to submit their best papers to some places. They get the first dibs on certain papers. That allows you to actually get, increases the likelihood of you having a paper that would be worth your while. And then there's what this specific phenomenon that this article happens to describe. Sometimes that's magical. Everybody understands this right away. You read about the Higgs boson, it's all out there. It doesn't need to be published anywhere. It's all it has a life of its own. But for more detailed stuff that are some smaller increments to the body of knowledge, the historical aspect makes a significant difference for the newer articles. Once the article's been around for a long time, the peer group, the community has an opportunity of being able to have its say about it.
Lisa Henschler from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, one of the librarians in the audience. Hello. I'd like to go back to the question about personalization, because I think that you surprised a lot of us with not just the statement, but sort of, I guess what I'll say is a second defense of the statement in the last person. So let me just ask you one more time. So it is your stance that unlike topical searching in Google Scholar, let's leave aside looking for the local Lexus or BMW dealership, or in my case, maybe Subaru, that the past things I've looked at as a scholar wouldn't be useful to crafting the discovery experience for me, to knowing that I tended to choose the psychological analysis of a particular social phenomenon over the sociological or the business. Those sorts of things, in your mind, are not the kinds of things that Google Scholar could use in order to improve my experience?
I was answering what is the case today and has been the case for the lifetime of Scholar.
What's the future?
If it turns out that is probably not as significant as you think. Research queries, let me bring you back to one of the points that came up. Most of the queries are unique. Most of the queries are many of the queries are relatively specialized. That by itself gives you a fairly strong signal in terms of what kind of articles are of use to you.
So we have a question at the front, and I saw another hand there and another hand there, okay? These will be the last 3 questions.
My name is Son Ho from Korea.
Hi.
Hi.
No, actually we have been working together for a while. I haven't met him in person.
Without Google Scholar, the local journal from Korea cannot survive. I know you very well, thereby your opinion always. And 2 questions. The first is, in book publication, usually there is a disappearance of the PDF. In book publication, EPUB 3.0 became a standard without PDF. And also, the journal in the web, the standard became just XML. Also, in book XML has a very similar structure. Therefore, when I use a book or a journal in the Google Scholar, you cannot differentiate between book and journals. And therefore, first question is, do you think the PDF can survive in journal publication? And second question is, there will be a differentiation between book and journal 20 or 30 years after, because we use a book or a journal in website without any print version. Therefore, at the time, we don't need to differentiate between book and journals because they show a very similar structure.
Okay.
2 questions.
Okay, so let me take one question at a time. You might have to remind me about the first question by the time I get to the end of the second one. So the issue of books and journals. As I was trying to refer to earlier, the user's expectations when they look for book-like results, their queries are different, tend to be different, and their expectations are fundamentally different. They are more along the lines of what you expect when you search on the web. You want to know who the king of Serbia was in 1492. Not that 1492 is a significant year, but just to pick a year. You want an answer. You want what has been known to the scholarship. So being able to then trying to figure out a mechanism by which you can index the full text and let the user see some other representation isn't that still satisfies the user is extremely difficult. That distinction is very basic. Now, it's not a matter of the form. Conference proceedings are not quite the same issue. There's 20 different articles of completely different things written just like journal articles. The expectation there is still of early work. The difference between early stage work and mature work is what underlies the differences of what we can do with them in a restricted access environment. If the restricted access was not an issue. On the web, we don't differentiate. Web search indexes every site that it can get its hands on. The distinction here largely is that there is the difference in terms of what the content actually includes and what the user can see. Can you go back and tell me what your first question was, and I will answer that. I've said I will forget.
In ebook, there is a disappearance of the PDF form. Therefore, in journal, do you think the PDF will survive?
Some downloadable format of some kind that I can keep away with myself without having to worry about access, no matter whether I have left my university, gone to a different place, gone home, gone with someplace else, that will survive. It used to be pages that I carried around. When I left Santa Barbara, I had like 17 boxes that I brought home, and then eventually had to get rid of them, just for that reason that I had collected in my travels in the academia. The challenge is, how do I continue to do my research in an environment whose dimensions I don't have any way of being able to predict?